There we go. Welcome everybody. So first off, let's just talk about how if everybody else lives on the East Coast as I do, as I can't even say normal people because ain't nothing normal about the East Coast. For some odd reason we get thunderclapped by Mother Nature all the time when it comes to weather and everything like that. The weather has been frankly obnoxious to say the least. It's that chili and cornbread weather outside. It's that Jody don't love me no more weather outside. It's that like when you open up the door and if you got glasses on, it's like crock pot. You just open the dishwasher after it just finished. It's just steamy. It's gross. It's nasty. It's when you feel like you gained like 10 pounds because, you know, the mist of the world just jumped on you. It's nasty. But I'm super excited about today. I took a week off. I've been super anxious in a good way, anxious, excited about today's episode. I took a week off, got some things to get into, knock out some things as far as projects and engaging and kind of hyping this up and everything like that. Yes, it's that Jody don't. If anybody's ever seen Baby Boy, has my guest ever seen Baby Boy? I can see you in the monitors. Have you ever seen the movie Baby Boy by chance? Host, guest of honor? No. Yes, no. She doesn't even look like she's no. That's a negative. But yeah, it's been pretty wild today. So before we get into my guest is can't English today for some odd reason. It's been a hard day. English hasn't been good to me today. So I'm gonna drop the intro real quick before we get into it.
They threw my ancestors in the ocean. Now we became the new wave, and we're about to drown this system. Every time I go in, every time I go in, every time I go in, boy, I'm jamming. Every time I go in, every time I go in, every time I go in, boy, I'm jamming. You know that I'm a kid. You know that I'm a kid. You know that I'm a kid, man. I'm jamming. You know that I'm a kid. You know that I'm a kid. You know that I'm a kid, man. I'm jamming.
Welcome everybody to the Kid Casper podcast. I'm your gracious, beautiful, blessed, beloved, and black host, the kid that they call Casper. The KID in Kid Casper stands for that king of development. I'm that menace with the melanin. Reject me as I am, as long as he is still relevant. For those that are checking in for the first time today, these monitors are the absolute worst. Never go on wish.com. Wish, we're just going to assume we can't trust Wish. I wish Wish didn't exist. That's how I feel today. These things are jumping out my ears. You know what I'm saying? It's just not the vibes. If this is your first time tuning in today, hello, I am the kid that they call Casper. I'm a Christian raptivist. Yes, rapper / activist. I love Jesus, but I'm super far from a pacifist. You know what I'm saying? Christian content creator, everything like that. You know, I do a couple of different things. I have a couple of different hats. Taco enthusiast. Apparently I have a PhD in pulling baby hairs, but so is my guest this evening at the same time. So my guest this evening, she is a decolonizing theologian, Colombian born, if I'm not mistaken. She's got more degrees than a thermometer. You know what I'm saying? She's a pretty smart person. I've been tuned into her content probably since she hit my radar, I would say March. I've been making an effort to kind of get my following to I'm like, hey guys, if y'all could like go in her comment section and just be like, hey, I want to talk to you. Please, I would love to talk to you. I like what you have to say. So we finally got her on here. I know she's especially big in the deconstructing TikTok space, the decolonizing TikTok space. But for me, somebody I look up to, in a sense, in this space, as far as challenging the norms. It seems like nuance is her niche, context is her favorite color, as is mine. Everybody, my guest this evening on the Kid Casper podcast is no other than the magnificent, mighty Joe Luehmann. How you doing today, Sister Joe? How are we doing today? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, beloved.
Oh, I kept thinking, don't forget to unmute. And then I forgot, obviously. But
All
I'm doing
good.
well. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was a really kind introduction.
I do my best. First off, I would like to just publicly and privately say thank you for coming on here. I know I've probably loaded, if not comment sections, definitely your messages, whether on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, you name it. Like I said, you've hit my radar since March. Christmas came early, it seems, and semi-late, but it all works out in the end. So thank you for accepting my invitation to come up here and share the space with me.
Of course. Yeah, thank you. It took us a minute to be able to schedule it, but we figured it out.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm saying? It's good to be an adult and be busy at the same time. So it all worked out, you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
All good at the end of the day.
So,
One of the reasons I want to bring you up here is, with this podcast, I've been able to just learn from different people, learn their experiences, have a dialogue with people, seek to understand and not be understood. And like I said, you just piqued my interest off rip. So I'm going to start this off by asking you to just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about who you are, what you do, and everything like that. The screen is yours.
So I am Colombian. I was born and raised in Colombia. I moved to the US 15 years ago now, and I still find myself just feeling off here, like I don't fully belong, which I think is the experience of all immigrants. Like, we're here, but we are not fully here, and we're making a home here, and at the same time home is elsewhere. So I started working for churches when I moved here. I got my master's degree and I got ordained, and just fighting inside of the church all the time with things that just felt so uncomfortable for me, and wondering what is it that we, like, if we really want the church to be an agent of transformation and change, how come we aren't? Like, how come it doesn't happen? And so asking these questions all the time. And inside of my master's program, there was a teacher that asked, if your churches were to disappear today, like if the churches where you work at were to just disappear today from your communities, would the community be better, worse, or it wouldn't even notice? And I had to sit there and be honest and say, like, they probably wouldn't notice in the best case, or they'd be better. They absolutely would be better. And so I started thinking, okay, well, what does it look like then to have a church that would be missed in the community? What does it look like to have a church that would actually do good work in the community? And I realized that that was never going to happen inside of the evangelical church. I started to realize how much the white evangelical church was so laced with business, with money, with power. And so I quit, and I quit, and I had an entire crisis, not just a crisis of faith, but an identity crisis, because my entire life was, my career, my views on the world, everything was so wrapped around Christianity. So I started just asking questions about, like, who am I if I'm not a Christian? Who am I if I'm not a pastor? What do I believe in if, the thing that I have given myself to, which was the church, is not really what I thought it was? So I started asking all of these questions, and I gave myself permission to land wherever I needed to land. There was no agenda. There was no, these are the right answers. I could ask any questions and I could say anything, and I gave myself permission. I started journaling a lot. I already journaled before, but it was more like a Bible journaling, and now it was just journaling for me. And it was this, how they tell us you have to meet with, I don't know if you know, but they told me that I had to have these meetings with God every day. And they would tell us it's like having coffee with Jesus every day. So I had that in my life already. Like, every morning I would wake up and read the Bible and journal. And so I started doing that, but I didn't want to meet with any Jesus or with any gods or with anything. I needed I needed to meet with me. I needed to know who I was, and I needed to know who I wanted to be and what I believed. And I learned later that that is meeting with divinity, really. Taking the time to meet with myself and taking the time to meet with my true self and be honest about what was happening inside of me is a meeting with divinity too. So I started doing that and discovering a lot of internalized self-hatred that had been imposed on me. Realizing a lot of theology it's what I called predatory. So a lot of theology had been used literally to groom me to accept and tolerate abuse. And this is really common for marginalized identities, particularly racially marginalized identities and gender identities, gender marginalized identities. So I realized, wow, I've been groomed my whole life to tolerate abuse, and I've been groomed my whole life to tolerate abuse in the name of God. And that is not a God I want to believe in. That is not a God I'm interested in following, a God that is used as a weapon to oppress others. So what does it look like now to have a relationship with divinity or a relationship with a God that is not harmful? Can I? Does it even exist? And so I started writing about all these things, and I figured I could find a few people that would kind of resonate with me. And then I ended up finding more and more people, and I continued to do the work of saying, okay, we need to divest, like our faith, our spirituality, our beliefs have to divest from all of the ways in which they have been co-opted and appropriated by systems of oppression to cause harm and abuse. So that's what I do. Are you there?
Yeah, I was just like, that was a lot to cover. I appreciate you taking your time, your time on that, man. That's, oh, good Lord, wow. I'm kind of like, okay, how? Now I feel kind of stupid asking my next question as far as my two grilling questions I told you I always have. But that's yeah, well said to say the least. Absolutely. But yeah, that's good. First off, I want to say I'm happy that you are able to find some sense of liberation in that, even if it seemed very, we'll say, turbulent. Whether it was turbulent by the ways of God, whether it was turbulent by the ways of people, whether it was turbulent even within yourself, I'm happy you were able to find some sense of liberation through all of that.
Thank you.
For sure. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been good. I've said it before, and I repeat it as often as I can, that theology can only be two things. Well, three really, but it can be a weapon of oppression or a tool of liberation or just theological nonsense. Like, I'm sorry, theoretical nonsense. So in the best of cases, it is a tool for liberation. And in the worst of cases, it is a weapon of oppression. And so theology has been for me now an absolute tool for liberation, even though it was a weapon of oppression before.
Gotcha. I feel kind of, actually, I can't switch it up just because you're like, to me, you're like in my opinion, you're like the Michael Jordan in this space. So I can't switch it up how I normally do things around here just for comedic purposes. So while we settle it and everything like that. So one of one of two questions I've rehearsed as far as these things go is I always ask my guests this. And first off, are you familiar with my my work as far as like my podcast content? Have you looked into me at all?
I saw a little bit of it when you asked me to come. So I saw a little bit of it, and I saw you having a conversation a couple of weeks ago, maybe. I forgot the name of the man that you were conversating with, but I saw a little bit of it.
Okay, cool. So you have absolutely no idea what I'm about to ask next. Awesome.
No, I don't.
So my first question, I always like to ask my guests, and it has like absolutely nothing to do with the conversation at all. I'm random like that. If you had to pick a favorite Disney princess, yes, I asked this question. What Disney princess would that be?
Okay. I don't. Okay. Can I answer my way? Because I don't follow rules. See, that's the problem.
Hey, I told you we're sharing this space together. That's fine.
Great. So I don't like princesses. I like villains. I really like villains. So if I were to pick a villain, and she can be a princess if you want to, it would be Cruella. I love Cruella de Vil. I love villains. I think that villains are just misunderstood heroes most of the time.
Most of
So
the time.
yes, not all the time, but most of the time, villains are misunderstood heroes. So I actually dressed up as Cruella de Vil one year. I was telling you that my kids and we dress up together. So all of us were villains. And so my 2-year-old, who was 6 months at the time, dressed up as um, the bad one from the Little Mermaid. I forgot her name. The bad one
Ursula,
from
if I'm not mistaken. Ursula, yes.
Ursula. Yeah, so she was Ursula, and I was Cruella de Vil, and we were all villains. But I love villains, so I can't pick a princess. I like Mulan though, but I don't know if she's a princess. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Cruella.
Gotcha. Apparently you are somebody's best head
I
and
love it. Let's
best friend. I can't English today. You're apparently somebody's best friend in their head today. So I
great.
guess you're
I
on
love it.
a pretty good track. And Mulan would definitely be one of mine for sure too. It used to be Pocahontas. Then I grew up and I was like, oh no, that good
I
gosh.
know, right?
But okay, so now I'm curious because the way since we're doing this, we're doing this Joe's way today. If you had to pick your either Marvel or DC, you can give me both. Who is your favorite villain from like the DC universe, and then DC Comics, and then who's your favorite villain from Marvel universe? Since we go on this route today.
Yeah. Oof, I don't know. I don't think he's a villain, but he's also not a hero. But I really like Vision, and he's from Marvel, right? Yeah. So I really like Vision, and the reason I like Vision is because in the first movie that we're introduced to Vision, he's having a conversation with himself. I don't know if you remember or if you've seen, but he's having a conversation with himself, and in the conversation with himself, he goes like, "Oh, who like they are talking about like who's the good guy here," and it's like there are no good guys. Like this is all an illusion. There are no good guys. We're all just this is all an illusion. This is all a lie. Because he's talking to Jarvis, I think, not to himself, but to Jarvis. And so I love that because I love that Vision is just aware that he's just as capable of doing harm as he's capable of doing good. And that regardless of what he does, for some people, it will be perceived as good. And for some other people, it will be perceived as bad. So I talk about how for many people, I am a hero because of some of the things that I do. But for many, many people, I'm a villain. Neither one of them is wrong. They are both right. It depends on how of the perspective that you're looking at what I do from. And I don't, like I don't need anybody to approve of me or not approve of me. I will be
I
a
know
villain
that's right.
for some. Right. And I will be a villain for some and I will be a hero for some others. But at the end of the day, what I have to do is be truthful to myself. And so that's why I like Vision, because that was the invitation. Vision was saying, I just have to do what I was created to do. And that's all, but there is no good and evil. That is all relative to who is looking at this story. So that being said, obviously there is harm that is caused. I'm just talking about my personal relationship with myself, not like if I cause harm, I want to address that.
Gotcha. And so that was from Marvel. So who would you pick for DC then?
I am not as acquainted with DC. I'm not as acquainted with all of the villains there. um so yeah, I don't know. I do know that I don't like the heroes. Honestly, the heroes are no different than how, I mean, a little bit different, less power, but the heroes are no different than the ways in which God has been used to groom people to believe things about themselves and about the society that we have. So I believe that a lot of the heroes that we have in movies are just white supremacist ways of grooming us into believing that the people that are doing a lot of harm in the world are actually doing good and they are heroes, but that's not true. So that's why I don't like him.
Got it. So now I'm curious. So I'm happy first off, I'm just gonna say I'm happy that you're completely smashing all and any expectations I had heading into this, which means now I have no other choice but not to be disappointed. So this is going really, really well already. And my second question, and this again, I don't want to make any assumptions, so I don't know if you're gonna disappoint me or throwing a curveball, but we're doing this Joe's way. I think that's what I'm going to title this episode. If you had to pick, and we'll see, if you had to pick a starter 6 Pokemon set, and you have
Oh,
kids.
God.
So please don't let me down. Please don't let me down, Sister
I
Joe.
will.
Oh, come
I
on.
will.
Everybody went through this. You got to do it. You got to do it. What 6 Pokemon would that be?
I know nothing about Pokemon.
Oh,
Nothing.
come on.
Nothing. I know absolutely nothing about Pokemon. Nothing. I can talk to you about, not Pokemon. That's for sure. I know absolutely nothing about them. I know Pikachu. That's it.
Oh,
Everybody
God.
knows Pikachu. I
Well, you know
did.
what? It's okay. I mean, I kind of already knew you were cooler than me, so I mean, like, I'm not really that's fine. And I'll let you slide just because I've waited on you on this platform long enough, so I think you're the only one that could be quiet. Be quiet. I'll put you in timeout. But that's all good and dandy. And you kind of gave us some extra gems already, even with just some of your hero and villain insight. We'll do that with quotation marks for the context of this conversation. But yeah, so on this episode, and on specifically just what I do with having people on, especially like new friends of the channel, new people, new faces in this very space. I usually give an opportunity to kind of give people that are watching that may be new to you for the first time, experiencing you for the first time, whether this is live or watching the playback, to kind of get an idea of who you are. In this case, who Joe is. Who is Joe Luehmann, correct? I'm pronouncing your last name correct?
You are, yeah. It's like Looman, Luehmann.
So Lou, like
Yeah.
with a who. Okay, cool.
Well, that's
Gotcha.
how I say it, but I am foreign too, and English is not my first language, so we both might be just saying it wrong. It doesn't matter.
Oh, that's fine. We'll be failing together. That's all good and dandy. But so I'm curious because it's one thing to see, like, I would say, I don't even want to say finished because our stories aren't finished until our lives are over, but tell us a little bit about what a young Joe Luehmann was like. As far back as you can remember, as far back you're comfortable going back. Tell us about a young Joe, the young, is whippersnapper okay? I don't know. I also don't know how old you are either. So I mean, like, I'm just gonna allow you to tell me in your time. I'm not asking, but tell us a little bit about what life was like in your early development.
Yeah, so I tell people I'm 45. I'm not 45. I'm 39. But I like telling people I'm 45 because they make a face.
Say that again.
They make a face when I say I'm 45. They go, "What?" I was like, "No, I'm just 39." And they're like, "Oh, you look great for 39." But it's because I've set a different standard. They think I'm 45. So it's a genius. It's just playing with their brain. I'm kidding.
So you're late 40s?
I am 39.
This is what happens. Look, everybody, I'm gonna put you on big screen quick. This is what happens when you drink water and mind your business. My goodness.
Oh, thank
Unless
you.
she's drinking coffee or soda right now.
No, I'm drinking white. It's a sparkling water. I like sparkling water.
Good for you. I know that's right. Shoot. But she said that's right. I like to set my own standards. I know that's right. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about yes, she is fabulous. And y'all in for a treat tonight. If y'all don't know, you about to know. But Sister Joe, if you do, I mean, I don't really care about anybody else that's watching, but if you could do me the honor in telling me and everybody else that is gonna watch now and the playback, tell us a little bit about you in the early stages of your development.
Yeah. So my parents got divorced when I was 3 years old. My mom was pregnant at the time with I wasn't 3 yet. I was 2. My mom was pregnant. And my sister was born when I was almost 3, not 3 quite yet. And we grew up with divorced parents, and I was the oldest. And my dad was very involved in my life. They were just divorced, but my dad was very involved. My mom was very involved. We lived with my mom. But as the oldest child in a divorced family, I internalized a lot of these responsibilities, that were expectations of me. So I became a very responsible person, very studious. I never really caused a lot of trouble for my mom, especially like during my younger years. It was like maybe in college a little bit, but even then, I always straight A student, got involved in everything all the time. I was the president of the school body. I was involved in everything in school, making decisions, and I was absolutely a nerd, proud of it too. And so I felt this responsibility. I felt like I had to be responsible. And I was told often things like, you have to be an example, you have to help your sister, you have to do all of these things. So as a child, you don't know that that's actually not your responsibility. And you just assume that that's just what's expected of you. So that's what I did. And my family, as it's common in a lot of Latin American families, there were like very blurry boundaries. So a lot of decisions were made for me without my consent. And when I was a teenager, a lot of decisions were made for me. When I was in college, a lot of decisions were made for me my whole life. And I was just expected to go with it, which often I did because, adults knew better than I did. And the thing is, they never tell you when you become the adult. They never do. Because we live in a society where keeping people dependent is the way that the system works. And I don't think that my family or my parents were doing that on purpose. It just kind of happens. It was done to them too. So then I moved to the US, part of it because I wanted to become an intern at a church and get my master's degree. And my real dream was not to be a pastor. My dream was to be a journalist. And as a journalist, I wanted to tell important stories and make the world better. And then I became convinced that I could do that as a pastor. I became convinced, and when I say that, I mean a lot of people convinced me that was good, because I fit the profile, right? I fit the profile of the person that could be a good pastor's wife, because that was the expectation. Like, I was studious, I behaved, I did all the things that were expected of me. I was smart, I was pretty enough, and so all of those things. And so I ended up marrying a pastor also, and becoming a pastor. But first I moved to the US, and here my goal was to spend some years. But I think that in a subconscious level, I also wanted to get away a little bit from my family, to have boundaries, because I knew that boundaries were not going to be possible so long as I lived so close. So now that I'm a little older and I understand the dynamics of trauma that are with my family, I know that in a subconscious level, I wanted to have some boundaries. So I moved here, but the goal was to go back. But then I ended up meeting people that we were going to start a church with, and meeting my husband, and I got married, and we started working really hard with the church. And I was, straight A student, was also straight A church attender, straight A worker. I worked so hard because so much of my own identity was deeply wrapped in my production levels. So how much can I produce? How much can I do? How much can people give me thumbs up? Was I had been conditioned to believe that my worth was attached to all of those things. My worth was attached to how much I could produce for others, how good I could be, how much authority figures could tell me that I was good enough. So I transferred all of this trauma of wanting my mom particularly and my dad too, to approve of me and give me the thumbs up that I actually never got from my mom. And I transferred all of that then to a pastor, and that, it's called trauma bonding. So the pastor became now my abuser, and the person that I was expecting would give me thumbs up. And he absolutely exploited that. And I don't think he did it consciously either. Like, honestly, I don't. But he exploited that, and he just started being like, you are so great at what you do, I want to give you more responsibility, but first I want to know if you can handle this much, and I want to know if you can handle this much, and I want to know if you can handle this much. And because of the trauma that I had carried with me, I worked hard, and I kept trying to prove that I was worth keeping around. And I think that is a lot of trauma that a lot of people that are in divorced families, and that are the oldest, especially the oldest women in families, carry with us. We want to prove to people, because of the childhood trauma that we carry, that we are worth keeping around. And so we accept and tolerate a lot of abusive behavior, because we think that maybe if we do that, they won't want to get rid of us, because we think our worth is in their approval. So after I left the church, I started doing a lot of really hard work to heal. And that's what I mean. Like, I needed to know who I am without these approval ratings. I needed to know who I am without the straight A's. Like, if I stopped being the perfect person, uh, am I worth keeping around? Like, why is my worth so tied to these? And how can I become myself? Just having my worth be on the fact that I am. That's why I like the phrase I am in the Bible, and how Jesus used I am so much, because I think the invitation is to be, to just be, to be fully and completely the image of divinity that we have been created in. And I cannot do that if I am performing for approval, if I am performing for somebody else to tell me that I get to be. So I started doing that, and the person that I am today is takes very, very good care and is very, very acquainted with the child that I was. And we have conversations, and I care for her, and I remind her that she did a lot of things because she didn't feel safe, but she's safe now. So I talk, for instance, about how I learned to lie a lot when I was a little girl because I was so afraid of my mom. And so I became a really good liar. And I held a lot of judgment for myself when I became a more intense Christian and I was a pastor, because I had been such a good liar and I still had this tendency to lie, until I learned that my child self didn't lie because she was bad or because she was a sinner, but because she was unsafe. And so now I don't lie anymore, because, or when I do lie, sometimes I still lie. I've told the story about how I lied to my doctor because I needed to be safe. And so I hold myself with a lot of um, compassion, and my child self and myself now, because I'm very acquainted with my child self. I've known her, I've sat with her, I've talked to her, I've asked her a lot of questions about the ways in which she saw herself, and the a lot of the internalized messages that she got from people, and that became her. A lot of the voices that told her who she was and who she wasn't. And so now I hold a lot of compassion, and I love myself really well, because I want that child self to be as safe and as free as she can be within me, if that makes sense.
No, I get it. It's funny. I was having a conversation, with somebody really close to me recently. I had a incident where I was just, I was getting prayed for and everything like that. And these people, then mind you, they're strangers. I don't know if you ever just walked up on somebody that's just praying, like they were having like Bible study at like, I think it was like 11 o'clock at night in different Columbia, Maryland. There's a Columbia, Maryland, out here in the Maryland area. And these guys were like praying and stuff. And one of the things they said to me was, you need to forgive and love that child version of yourself because you keep abandoning him. And I was like, huh? You don't know me I'm sitting there in my subconscious and out loud. I'm like, y'all don't know me from a can of paint. You don't know what you're talking about. But then even stuff that they were saying was kind of like in tune to like things I've talked about with my therapist. So I think like it's funny, like in our adulthood, we have to almost, the way that my therapist describes it, it's like,
Reparenting.
that kid in the back seat, like you have children. So if your kid's carrying on in the back seat, you can only ignore them for so long. You have to
Right.
acknowledge them at some point, and they need to feel valued. They need to feel safe. They need to feel loved. They need to feel validated. They need to feel like that they're not just saying and making all these obnoxious noises, but they're just doing their best to communicate with
Right.
whoever their caretaker is, essentially what they want. So I definitely get that aspect. But yeah, that's quite a bit to unpack. I'm trying to think of how to navigate through this conversation, but thank you for sharing that, especially the part where you said like you've learned to, like, I guess like in a lot of ways you've learned to fall in love with this, like, I guess like you from your formative years.
Yeah.
Hopefully I got that correct, as far as like what you were trying to articulate.
I used to meet me with so much judgment. And now I love me. I don't meet me with judgment. I meet me with compassion, because I can see that the choices that I made were choices that I was making to keep myself safe. In fact, I meet me with not just compassion, but also I celebrate me. Like we kept ourselves safe with very limited tools. We kept ourselves safe, and there is a journey of reparenting that we have to go through, because due to colonization, especially for people like me and you, who are in racially marginalized identities, Our trauma is very particular. There are a lot of particularities about our trauma, and our childhood trauma, particularities about that. Our parents did not raise us with the strict boundaries that they did, because that's the most common way in which a lot of people of color were raised. A lot of strict boundaries, a lot of just, a lot of harshness, a lot of authoritative parenting. They weren't doing that because they were bad parents. They were doing that to keep us safe from colonization. They were doing that because, I mean, for my indigenous ancestors, they needed their kids to behave, because if their kids behave, then the colonizers would not take them and do things to them. They were trying to protect them. And that is magnified too with children of people that were enslaved. Black people that were enslaved, they were trying to keep children safe. So I'd rather beat you so that you'll behave than him kill you or him beat you. So recognizing that we just have all of this legacy and all of this collective generational trauma that gets to stop with me. My children are not going to have to carry that trauma, because I can reparent myself. I can look at myself and say, your mom did the best that she could with the tools that she had and the trauma that she was carrying from her own ancestors. Your dad did the best that he could with the tools that he had. Same thing. And now you have more tools. So you get to do better, and you get to reparent yourself and look at yourself with compassion and say, I see you. I know what you went through. It was painful. It was hard. And we don't have to be there again. We're safer now. We both are safer now, and create a safer environment for my children. So when my children lie to me, I don't get mad at them. I apologize to them, because they are lying to me because they are not safe with me. It's not safe for them to tell me the truth. So I apologize to them, and I ask them, like, is there anything that I can do to make it safer for you to be able to tell me the truth? And I forgive me, because I haven't made it safe enough for you to feel like you can tell me the truth. So that changes everything. They are going to have so much many more tools, because they are not going to meet themselves with a lot of the judgment that I met myself with, you know?
I get that. And I think I tell people this all the time, especially for being like, Black, Indigenous people of color. We were essentially like, we had to learn the rules to survive in this white
Yes.
world, to navigate in these different spaces and stuff. It's the having the mindset to be semi-militant in a sense, whether in conversation, whether it's society, whether it's economic strides and everything that we would like to hit, but it's also, we live in a white world, so we are essentially, we'll just use the word groomed for this situation, but we have to adapt to survive in this country, or in a lot of these spaces, but not necessarily live in these spaces. And the toll that it ends up taking, it does end up taking where we're always in militant mode. And just like, as you said, it's like, we don't know what it's like to be safe, because we are always taught to, I would say, cope with the danger that we're in, but not exactly know what liberation and freedom feels like. But for sure.
Yeah. I wrote recently about how for a lot of Black and brown people, resistance is rest, because we've been denied it.
Say that, hold on. See, you've only been on here for 42 minutes and 56 seconds. Can you say that one more time? Because somebody's in the back of the church picking their wedgie out, wiping the crust out their eyes. I need to say that one more again for me, please.
Yeah. For a lot of us in marginalized identities, a lot of Black and brown people specifically, rest is resistance. Resisting these systems of oppression is rest, because we've been denied rest. At all times, our nervous systems are activated because we need to survive here. So when we look for spaces or create spaces where rest is afforded to us, we are resisting supremacy culture just by resting. Just by resting, we are resisting supremacy culture, because inside of supremacy culture, we are not seen as humans. We are machines. We are simply things that are moved around. We are things that are to be exploited. We are just resources to be exploited. So the moment that I say, I refuse to be a resource that you exploit, and I'm going to rest, I am resisting supremacy culture. I am standing against it and saying, I'm a human, and I refuse to allow you to treat me as less than a human.
That's powerful, because like it's funny that I've had this mindset more and more as of late, where it's the being able to, and just being able to like forgive. I don't even know why you need to forgive yourself. So even like saying this, I'm like trying to like decolonize this like unnecessary like guilt that like I think a lot of like POCs feel, is being able to just live and breathe. And
Yes.
I heard somebody put it like this. I was talking to them. I'll have to send you a clip of this, but there's this one black trans woman that I met in DC, and one of the things she said was being able to just live and exist in spaces, whether it's spaces we've created in our own, or even in like white space where we're able to just not assimilate,
Yeah.
rest and smile. That's what liberation feels like.
Yeah.
So when I tell people not always having to fight all the time in itself is liberation, because you've convinced yourself to not be, I would say, like a cog in the machine that they've created.
Right.
But just being able to just say, hey, I'm a human. If you don't believe me, that's your problem. It has nothing to do with me. But I
Right.
have to convince myself too. I think that's super important when it comes to just growing and not allowing these different circumstances and spaces to shape us, for sure. That was
Right.
powerful.
Yeah,
Powerful.
because we've been conditioned to believe that. We've been conditioned to believe that we are valuable so long as we play into the system.
Mm,
But that's not true. Our value is intrinsic. We're valuable. That's it. That's it. But in this society that we've created, the only people that get to exist are the most privileged in it. I was telling someone, we're not rich or anything, so we don't have wealth privilege. But my husband's white. He's white, tall, has blue eyes, like he's a white man, cisgender white man. And I was talking to him about his experience traveling to Colombia. He's gone to Colombia with me several times, and he's gone to other places with me, and we've traveled. And I said, how are you received when you travel? He's celebrated everywhere. He's celebrated. The white man is here, and he's celebrated. So good to have you here. It's so exciting. Thank you for coming. I said, how is my experience? Now that you travel with me, how is my experience traveling? From the moment we get to the airport, what happens? And he's like, you're looked at with suspicion everywhere. They double
mm.
check because you have a Colombian passport, because you don't speak English as well as you're supposed to. You are looked at everywhere with suspicion. And I said, yeah, the only place I'm not looked at with suspicion is in Colombia, but I live in the US, and I walk in my days and I live my life being looked at with suspicion all the time. And that affects my nervous system all the time. That it's the same way that what black people are looked at. It's the same way that all immigrants of color are looked at. We are looked at with suspicion, which means that our nervous system is constantly activated. And I don't know, are you okay if I explain a little bit about the nervous system and why that matters? Is that okay?
No, you're fine. Hey,
Okay, good.
this is for me. I don't mind listening to you talk your talk. Everybody else can deal with it. Go ahead. You all
Okay.
right.
So we have different nervous systems, but there is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and this is very oversimplified. I'm obviously not a doctor, but parasympathetic and sympathetic. The parasympathetic nervous system is activated when we are at rest, and when the parasympathetic system is at rest, like when it's activated, our digestive system is working well. Our entire body is going into healing mode. It goes into what's wrong in our body and starts like patching things up. Your brain is able to think in better ways because your amygdala is not sending all of these signals to your body to be on alert. But when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, which is the fight flight, it activates the fight flight response. Your amygdala starts sending all of these neurotransmitters to your body and telling your body, we are in danger. We are in danger. And so your stomach, your digestive system stops working because you cannot digest when you're in danger. There is no healing that is happening at the cellular level. No healing can happen while you are in the sympathetic nervous system. So a lot of cells that have to regenerate, and a lot of cells that have to, they never regenerate. And so when I say that we live in a world that continues to tell us that we're dangerous and that kills us, we mean that literally. because our sympathetic nervous system is activated at all times. We are never safe. There is no space in the world where Black trans women are safe. So they get cancer, so they get stomach issues, they get sick. A lot of us don't have spaces where we are safe. And so when we say this is killing us, we mean it. And so when we are actually looking for spaces or creating spaces, fostering spaces, which I think should be the role of the church, but it's not what the church is doing. When we foster spaces where everybody and anybody can be safe, we are literally helping them heal at every possible level, from the cellular level all the way to their brain. Is literally being able to think like, oh, I get to just exist here. I get to consider all of these things. I'm not just trying to survive. So when we talk about the difference between living and simply existing, we are also talking about our ability to heal and our ability to leave behind a better legacy for our children. Because if the person that my children meet is this person that is constantly on her sympathetic nervous system with a brain that is impaired to be able to make rational decisions because she's always trying to feel safe and always on edge, then I am giving them trauma that I could have avoided for them if I would have just had access to safety. So when I say rest is resistance, I mean that at every possible level. When we rest, we heal from the cell all the way up to our brain and our ancestral trauma.
Yeah, it's there's a study I always include when I try to explain to people, like for instance, like microaggressions, for instance. There was a study back in, I think it was 2014, where I've explained to people, like typically like Black, Indigenous people, color, but specifically when the study was taken on African Americans, I think it was 2014, it was proven that typically, because of like what we go through as far as like the discrimination we face, microaggressions, offense, dealing with these toxic environments, our cells literally age faster than anybody else. So the things that our cells are going through at 20, a 40-year-old white man is probably at that same rate, as far as like not so much growth, but even like where the deterioration process starts. So you're just like, it's like you start having strokes at the age that somebody else that is not of a person of color gets a stroke in your 20s, heart attacks at 20s that other people typically get in their 40s, and all these things are, these are a result of navigating in these spaces. So I think like the one thing that
and then we're gaslit and we're told, oh, it's because you don't take care of yourself. How? Like, did you see what you've created? So then we're blamed. Like, oh, Native Americans, they like all of the stereotypes about all of us. Like, Native Americans are like a lot of alcohol. Yes, that's a response to the system. It's not a flaw in their character. And so there are all of these stereotypes and they blame us for it. But in reality, our bodies are just responding to the system.
Yeah, because then you know what it is, though? If they acknowledge the very things that afflict us, they would have to if they had to acknowledge our afflictions, they would have to trace back where these afflictions came from. And then with acknowledgement comes a sense of responsibility. The problem is, and I said this the other day when I was talking to one of my brothers, is apologies are pretty much useless for me personally. I don't want your apologies. I want responsibility. You know what I'm saying? Accountability. I want acknowledgement. Because you telling me I'm sorry, it's like that doesn't make my arm stop bleeding. That didn't make the offense go away. But you acknowledging that it was a problem, you acknowledging that it's toxic, you acknowledging that it was problematic, that's on you now as far as responsibility goes. Because it's like, okay, cool. Now that we got here, what are we going to do about this? So,
and that's where we, like, you're talking about the difference between an apology and actual genuine, like, I'm sorry is not an apology, right?
No.
But we're talking about like what repentance really looks like, right? Repentance requires that we name the harm done so that we can say like, oh, I totally understand how I harmed you. So you name the harm done, but then on top of that, you change behavior. Because apologies without changed behavior are manipulation. That's all they are. So, yeah, I'm with you. If you are not changing your behavior, you're not apologizing. You're just trying to get away with more of the same behavior. That's it.
Yeah, and what I've also learned when it comes to, especially with dealing with people that are gaslighting you,
Hmm.
they'll say, "I'm sorry," because it gets you to stop talking to them faster.
Right.
So what it really is let me apologize so you can get out of my face. I want to be able to gaslight you, offend you, say
Right.
whatever I want to you in peace, whether you hear me or not. But of course, that gets covered up with statements like, "Oh, you're being too sensitive. You're
Right.
overreacting. You're being dramatic." It's like, I wouldn't have to respond if there wasn't an action to respond to.
Right. That's why when
And
they tell us, like, stop talking about race, stop talking about white supremacy, it's over. And I'm like, it's not over. So we can't stop talking about it. We can't stop. You never corrected your behavior. The behavior was never corrected. You changed some policies. You said, I'm sorry, and made it look like things are a little bit better. But at the end of the day, the system is still there. So you're right. If they were to look at all of the things, they would realize that they are complicit, and that complicity requires for them to change a lot of behavior that they don't want to change right now.
so one of the reasons I brought you on here, and I've always been wanting to talk to you, is because, okay, so a little story about me, a little background around me.
Hmm.
So I've been, as a disciple of Christ, I didn't get saved till I was 19. I was going to hell on a scholarship. I'm just gonna say it just like that. I was bugging. I was going to hell on a scholarship. In over the last year, with me stepping into, I would say stepping into like this we'll call this season of my ministry, activism, social justice, because guess what, the Bible's written for social justice, for those that don't really know. I've realized that I've had to deal with a lot of white lash. That's something that I like to call it. I've woken up, or I'll say like this, as I've doubled down in my blackness, I've noticed that people around me, especially in white evangelical spaces, doubled down on their whiteness.
Right.
And so that, I would say, for me, was when I realized, like, okay, we actually, like, I knew there was kind of a problem. It's like, there's just a little bit of racism in church. But
Hmm.
then, as I would say, my tolerancy for it was just fading away. I was like, okay, a little bit is too much at this point.
Yes.
And so, when we talk about like what we've seen in these spaces, you not only being very close as far as like clergy, whether it's being a pastor, married to a pastor, talking about clergy wise, working within certain roles in ministry and everything like that. How deep does this run? And when I say, like, how deep does this run? How deep does it run when we talk about, or better yet, I'll just say this. Is the American church, or American Christianity, or white supremacy, are they distant cousins, or did they grow up in the same house? Because I feel like at this point, especially since, with the Trump era over the last 5 years, January 6th, there's no denying that the church has had its hand in this, when we're talking about white supremacy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How important is it, I would say, especially now more than ever, for these institutions, or better yet, just individual to individual, to decolonize their faith or just their theology at this point?
Yeah. Listen, I don't think Jesus had any intention of starting a new religion at all.
Can
I
you
don't
say, please, hold on. See, I'm about to kick my shoes off. You already got me excited. Could you say that one more time? Because
Yes.
people don't believe me when I say this
No.
around people. Say that one more time for me.
Yeah.
One more again, please.
Jesus had no intention. If you read the words that we have of Jesus, which are not a lot, by the way, and also we don't know how accurate they are, but that's another conversation. If we read the words of what we have of Jesus, there was no intent in starting a new religion. The Christianity was not the goal. That was not what Jesus was talking about. Jesus was never a Christian, and Jesus never intended for anybody to be a Christian. Jesus was talking to Jewish people, and he was inviting Jewish people to think about their own theology and their own ways in which they were engaging theology in new ways. That was the invitation. And it wasn't even for all of them. The invitation was for some Jewish people that were using theology to oppress people. And Jesus was saying, we can actually do better. And we can think about all of these things in new ways. Now, Jesus died, though. And a lot of the narratives about Jesus became grand, like they became something that they were not supposed to be. And so we have an entire religion that is born, and a lot of the religion that is born out of these narratives of Jesus is a religion that is born from the margins, people that are being abused, people that are being marginalized, people that are being quite literally burned in hot oil, people that are being thrown with lions, people that are being burned, crucified. And these people are trying to make sense, right? That's why they are called apocalyptic Jews. They are apocalyptic Jews that are writing things and trying to make sense of how can we serve a good God? How can we be people of God and also be subjected to so much abuse? How is this justice? So when you say that the Bible is a book of justice, of social justice, you're absolutely right. And if you talk to especially progressive Jewish people, but Jewish people in general, and the way they talk about the Bible and the way they talk about these stories, they are talking about what does it look like to move the world toward justice as the people of God.
The term I just learned over the last year, especially, I feel like this wasn't taught enough, especially within like white evangelical spaces, was the term tzedakah, which literally means to focus on charity in itself. And what is charity? Charity was, if not Jesus's first ministry, just being charitable, not just in monetary status, tangible goods, but just treating people with dignity, respect. His doctrine was always love. That's why, like, when people say Jesus was the Christian, that's blasphemous. I'm like, well, he wasn't. His doctrine was love. He had no intention to start an institution. He intended to start a relationship with people and change lives, not systems.
Right. But I mean, Jesus isn't the only person that has tried to do that. And Jesus just became very popular. And the reason Jesus became popular is not because he was supposed to start a religion. It's not because now with Jesus we had the right revelation. None of that. That's all just anti-Semitic tropes, really. It's because Constantine, who was the emperor, became a Christian. Many people believe that he didn't even become a Christian genuinely. He was just using Christianity to be able to push a lot of narratives. And he made Christianity legal inside of the Roman Empire, well before it was illegal. And then Theodosius I, a few years later, made not only Christianity legal, but made Christianity now the official religion of the empire. And anybody that did not subject themselves to the teachings of those who were saying that these are the right teachings of Christianity were going to be killed. So Christianity in that moment changes and it becomes now a weapon of oppression. Now, were there a lot of people on the sidelines, still marginalized people who identified as Christians, who still believed in Christianity as a tool of liberation? Yes, they've always existed. They will always exist. Their books have been burned. Their words have been ignored. They've been called heretics and they've been burned at stakes. They still are, killed in ways and silenced and mistreated. That doesn't change the fact, though, that Christianity can be two things. Christianity has been, from that moment, a weapon of oppression and supremacy culture, a way to push the narratives of supremacy culture, and not just a way, a really very effective way to push supremacy culture, to move the empire forward. Because now people were saying, it's not that we think we're better than, it's not that we think we're superior, it's that God said we are. That's really powerful. Especially with ancient people, right, that believed in God. And so you have colonizers then 1,000 years later that come here and they meet people of the land, they meet indigenous people. You have colonizers in Europe that move to Africa and meet all of these people that are not Christians, and they already look at them as less than for the mere fact that they are not Christians. That's it. They are not Christians. Their superiority. So Christianity becomes this tool that justifies your behavior because you are just superior. You are, and so they co-opt this idea of holiness and being the chosen people of God, the set apart, and they colonize that idea. They co-opt this idea. They appropriate this idea to make it seem like they are the ones that God wants to be able to take over the entire world. And so colonization, it would have happened with or without Christianity. Christianity, however, was a really incredibly powerful weapon to justify it and to be able to give them a sense of like morality in it. So they were not only doing something that was important and good, they were doing something that was moral.
I don't
You
know
know,
if it was morality, Sister Joe. I think they were looking for I mean, like, we're human, so we all do this. Is they were looking for that stinking thinking, that thinking error, that justification. Oh, it's just a little bit of racism. It's just a little bit of ambition. It's just a little bit of political gain. It's all these things that they've tried to align with a higher power. You know what I'm saying? Even though, let's just be honest, God doesn't really have a lot to do with a lot of stuff that happens. I remember, I think it was like one of these videos you made. It was saying, God is in control. I always say, in my life at least, God is in charge. God is not in control. Meaning that there's many people and they have different roles in this life. Whether I encounter them, whatever God that they pray to, but they all have their own decisions at the end of the day. We're not robots. So when people say like God is in control, they forfeit that. They at least are trying to. They're trying to relinquish responsibility from the decisions that they make and how they afflict and hurt people. The problem is, though, is that when people do wickedness and evil in the name of Jesus, those that are Christian have to acknowledge those things too. That's why when like I'm talking to people from indigenous communities, they're like, man, the church is evil. I'm like, yeah, you're right. There's some people are like, how could you say that? I'm like, it's the truth. We can't, we have to acknowledge that there was times within when the gospel was being spread that it wasn't all God. And when I say it wasn't all God, meaning like it was mostly man-made. We just put a Saint John on the front of it, or a Saint Mary's, or all these other things to justify the fact that we had our own political, societal gain to get some type of monetary growth. But we just, we slapped Jesus on the front of it as our Nike symbol. And yeah, so it's, I noticed that more and more times that people get more offended at the fact that they have to talk about the difficult things that Christianity has done instead of doing the difficult things that Christianity calls them to. And I think
right.
that's what is the most disheartening when engaging in people, because they refuse to acknowledge what part is them and what part is of God, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I don't believe in God as a being anymore. So that changes a little bit of my framework as well. Um, I do believe though that I do believe in divinity. So let me explain the difference.
Oh no,
Um,
I know a little something, but talk about this to the audience. Like I said,
yeah,
this will be good for everybody. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So I don't believe that there is a being out there. I don't believe that there is a being external of me out there that is a God. I think that is just a projection that humans make to be able to make sense of things, and especially ancient humans, to be able to make sense of a lot of things. So we created a projection of ourselves, but that was a superhuman, to be able to explain things. I do believe, however, in divinity, and I think that divinity is a lot of things. Divinity is humanity is part of divinity, but it extends beyond divinity. I think that the earth is divine. I think that the universe is divine. I think that the quantum field is divinity. Just knowing that time can bend, and time really means nothing in the quantum field. So divinity to me exists. There is this side of spirituality that I absolutely see, and that has been woven throughout our history, and humans have been trying to make sense of that. So when people say God made me do that, or God told me to do that, and we're talking about just quite literal abuse, like they say
Mm-hmm.
God told us to go and colonize these lands, God told us to take over, like Manifest Destiny, right? Manifest Destiny talks about how God willed it that this land be ours, regardless of the people in the land already. I think that it is a projection too. I think that it is people trying to justify the things that they want to do, and that their most unhealed self is trying to get them to do, because their unhealed self is trying to keep them safe, even if another person is not safe themselves. But I think that that's not divinity. You are correct in when you say that's not God. I think that that's not divinity. I think that's our trauma. I think that is our societal conditioning. I think those are our insecurities. I think that's our fear. But when we tap into the most authentic version of ourselves, the most healed version of ourselves, what many Christians called the Holy Spirit, or other people call the intuition, or other people call the higher self, when we tap into that, we never cause harm. I think that that's what Jesus talked about. Oh, somebody's calling me. When Jesus talked about how, when he said, I am the bread of life, I am, and he kept talking about I am. And then he says, when I leave you. And everything that I'll do, you'll do greater things. I think that Jesus was inviting us to recognize that divinity is within us, that divinity is not this thing out there that we're going to be able to channel with some prayers, or that we're going to be able to get its attention in some ways. If we behave in some ways, or do certain things, or say certain things, we'll be able to channel this divine being. But instead recognize that we are the agents of change, that we are the divine, that we carry divinity within us. And a lot of the narratives in the Christian books of the Bible speak to that, right? It says you are walking epistles. We are walking epistles. We are the walking story of God unfolding in the world. We are the ones that created. We are the ones that bring justice into the world. When he talks about how we are the body of Christ, he's not talking about the church as an institution, but he's talking about embodying divinity in such a way that everywhere that we step foot, everywhere that we go, the like justice happens, that we are fighting for justice, that we are inviting people into wholeness and healing and creating safety for them. So where all of these people that were co-opting and using narratives that were Jewish narratives to be able to justify their behavior, where they tapped into the divine? No, they were tapped into their trauma and their insecurities and their societal conditioning, which happens to all of us. And that's when people say you cannot trust, a lot of toxic Christianity says you cannot trust your emotions. It's misunderstanding a lot of things that are in the Bible, that it doesn't say that you cannot trust any of your emotions. In fact, your emotions are what inform you of what is happening inside of you. I think that what we have to consider is, am I acting out of trauma? Am I acting out of societal conditioning? Am I acting out of insecurities? Or am I acting out of my true self, the one tapped into divinity?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's one thing that I've learned, and this is why like the conversation of mental health is super important,
Right.
especially if you're going to tap into that, I would say that that divine version of yourself. Because for you to tap into the divine version of yourself, you have to acknowledge the parts you are not divine. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
To reach a certain level of inner beauty, you gotta address some of the ugly. And some of the
Right.
ugly is not exactly so much ugly. It's just that's why. So I don't know how you feel about this terminology. I always tell people I don't know what a negative emotion is.
Hmm.
I
Right.
just don't. Even
Right.
fear. Jesus
With you.
himself felt fear. He felt everything that we felt as people.
Right.
That's you know what I'm saying. And I always tell people, I was like, I don't know what is a negative emotion. And they're like, well, you can't trust your emotions. Your emotions are indicators. How are we supposed to know
Absolutely.
that? How are we supposed to know Jesus was sad just off of Jesus wept when Lazarus died? Well, he had to have experienced some sense of sadness to express emotions. It was an involuntary response to the certain circumstances that were taking place. And
Right.
when we're talking about, especially when it comes to tapping into um your divine version of yourself, like whatever God anybody prays to, you have to, I would say, like there's a sense of cleansing that needs to happen. I think that is the best way to describe it. And when it comes to that's interesting. As a Buddhist who once considered himself a Christian, I appreciate her perspective. It sounds realistic and places accountability on the action of believers rather than the God. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why I tell people, um, as far as like things that happen right now, I always say like, you know, God will do whatever he wants to do, whatever divine being we pray to. For me, it's the Trinity. For other people, it's Allah. It's I don't really know all the gods. I kind of just know my own. But I think for me, as far as living this life, that there's a sense of responsibility. Unless I wouldn't really be here, I wouldn't even have my own brain or emotions if I wasn't supposed to have my own thoughts, feelings,
Mhm.
and opinions on certain things. But it's definitely, there's something that you said there, and I was curious because I never heard anybody put it that way. Is when people, I guess, like, I'll describe it like when people weaponize or use, like, step into like they're stepping into, like, I guess, like their divine self, or they say there's their divine self, that they are responding out of a sense of trauma. I've never heard anybody put it like that. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit, my sister, what you meant by that?
When they are tapping into their divine self, or where they aren't.
I think when you were saying, like, for instance, like when if we're just talking historically, if we're talking
Yeah.
about Christianity in the world, let's not just go off of the Western hemisphere, but like what we've seen. You said, they could be going off of societal norms, they could be going off of experience, whether it's selfish gain or anything like that. You said that they respond in a sense of trauma, and I never heard anybody put it like that. Would you like to kind of unpack that a little bit for me, please?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just think about, like, we can start at why Christianity accepted the terms of the Roman Empire. And if there is, like, the only reason they accepted the terms of the Roman Empire was the trauma that they had been subjected to for the last 300 years or 400 years. They had been burned, crucified, murdered in horrific ways. And then here comes power and says, hey, we want to make you the official religion now, which means that anybody that is not a Christian is going to be treated the way that you've been treated for the last 400 years, but you will no longer be treated that way. Do you accept? And they went, yeah, totally, totally. And that was not a response from the most authentic self, it was a response out of, we don't want to be murdered anymore. We've experienced 400 years of horrific, horrific persecution. We don't want to do that anymore. So their response was a response out of trauma, and that's why oppression continues to happen, right? Because traumatized people that don't have the tools, or whatever it is, to heal, or don't want to heal, continue to play into oppression, continue to trade power for healing. Instead of healing, they say, well, I'm giving power here, I'm being given power here, and perhaps if I'm powerful enough, I won't hurt anymore, and I think that I won't hurt anybody else. But power always corrupts, and power always means that somebody's being hurt. So that's what you see when white women got their right to vote. White women got the right to vote, not because they were fighting as feminists, but because they became just as patriarchal as white men. So they looked at white men and said, we want the right to vote.
Oh,
And the
no,
reason
you
why we
did
can
it.
prove that
No,
we
you
can prove
didn't.
to you that we can get the right to vote is because we are not like those black women and those brown women. We are not like them. So give us the right to vote, because we are the civilized ones. We learned from patriarchy how to be good women. And in fact, we will travel around the country and teach Black and Indigenous women how to behave as appropriate women inside of this patriarchy if you give us the vote. And so they did.
Ooh.
So, and was that a response to their own trauma? Absolutely. So when you respond out of trauma and hold on to power, you are going to end up hurting somebody else. It always happens. So that's where the question matters so much, right? Am I doing this out of my own trauma because I want to be safe? And this is happening today. You have a lot of people that are using capitalism as a way to stay away from their own marginalization, which is valid. I'm not saying it's not valid. But if your desire is to become a billionaire, your racial identity first is not going to protect you from white supremacy. The money is not going to protect you from white supremacy. And second, you being a billionaire means that you are now an oppressor. So you can be a billionaire of color, you're just trading weapons. You just want to be a weapon. So that's why I tell people, you can deconstruct all the things that you want to deconstruct everything. Ask all the questions that you want to ask. But if you stop at deconstruction and not move into decolonizing, which means asking the questions about oppression and asking the questions about how am I a colonizer, what parts of me have been colonized so that I've become a colonizer, then you will continue to cause harm. If you're not divesting from power, if you're not aware of systems of oppression, you just don't believe in God. You just have deconstructed a lot of ideas of God, which is good, but you are now an atheist causing harm.
Whew.
The response is trauma. I was told by an atheist. He looked at me and he goes, "Do you think that he thought I was a progressive Christian? I'm not." He said, "Do you think that progressive Christianity is just a step toward atheism? Like you're going to continue to evolve and become an atheist?" And I was like, "Do you hear the supremacy in your question? Do you hear it? Because I do. Do you hear the supremacy? You sound exactly like evangelicals. Are you going to evolve and become like me? No. No. I will never stop believing in divinity. Never. Never. I'll never. Do I not believe in God as a being? Yes. So to some respects, I am an atheist, but I'm not. I believe in divinity. So if we are only saying, I don't want to be harmed anymore, but we don't recognize that we can be also the people that's why I like Vision, right? Because Vision makes that. He says, I have the power to become the abuser too. Inside of me is everything that is inside of every single person, because we have the same nervous systems inside of us, and we can become the oppressor if we don't learn to listen to the most marginalized. That's why it is more likely for people that are one level separated from power. So white women, sometimes men of color, cisgender heterosexual men of color, or white cisgender heterosexual women, to become oppressors, because they only have to do this one little, if only they were men, if only they were white, then they would have power. And that is a trauma response. But it's very, very, very rare to see Black trans immigrant woman trade power, because she's experienced so much oppression, she doesn't want anybody else to experience it. Because her trauma has been the only experience she's had. She's never tasted power. So we have to question ourselves and say, am I here fighting for equality and liberation for all? Or am I fighting to minimize the oppression I'm under? And those are two very different journeys, and they yield very different results too. So trauma yields more oppression. It just changes your role in that oppression. But moving out of divinity yields liberation and equality, equity.
You know, it's funny. So I did this. Okay, so let me get in my nerd bag for a second. So I did this Bible study earlier this year after watching. I'm not even kidding. After watching Black Panther, and I was talking about I was watching Killmonger, for instance. Killmonger was this, he was this, his dad was first, not first American. He was first generation from Wakanda, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then, came over to America, set up home in America. Killmonger's dad dies. He's killed by, Wakanda principles and everything like that. So what happens to Killmonger, or Eric Killmonger, or whatever? I can't remember his actual last name in the movie. But Michael B. Jordan's character, essentially.
Yes.
With all the bumps. That still freaks me out. I don't like the bumps. Ugh. But he went to school, he got into MIT, he joined the military, and he ended up equipping himself in certain ways that was able to put him to ascend himself to a certain level and stature that he ended up becoming the oppressor. Right. And I always tell people, be careful trying to, not so much liberate yourself. Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? I'm all for that. But when you just stop at you or people that come from your circumstances, it's very easy for you to become the very thing you hate, which is the oppressor. He became the weapon as you described it. He became the very thing, and we're talking about, I don't know if we could call like what he was doing necessarily in that movie colonization, but the minute he was able to have the technology, the resources, and the military forces as far as back goes, he was in that seat.
Right.
But it was that if only I could remove this, that's very easy. So yeah, I definitely agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And a lot of these narratives are in the Bible. That's why people are like, the Bible is just nonsense, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, it's beautiful. If you are able to read it properly, if you are able to understand that this is an ancient book where ancient people were leaving their wisdom to us in it, it's beautiful. Because it talks there about revenge, and and when it says revenge is of the Lord, I don't think that it's talking about don't ever fight for justice, which is what we are taught, right? Like, don't, if somebody wrongs you, just don't do, because that's grooming, that's predatory theology. If somebody wrongs you, don't do anything. Nope, that's not what it's saying. What it's saying is, don't be so consumed by revenge. Revenge will be of the Lord's. Be consumed with wholeness. Be the most whole, healed person that you can be. And out of that, make decisions. Because if you're making decisions just to vindicate yourself, you're going to end up becoming the oppressor. That is not something that comes out of the healed self. It comes out of the very wounded self, which is understandable. No, there is no victim blaming here or judgment toward people that are trying to keep themselves safe. However, we don't want to cause harm anymore. And if we don't want to cause harm anymore, that means that we have to question and consider the ways in which we are capable of harm, and the ways in which we've been wounded. And so we carry all of this trauma, and that causes us to become traumatizers now. That's a new word.
We're gonna go with that. That is definitely the new word of the day. Traumatizers. Got it. There was something that I was curious about because I explained it to people like this. And I never heard it until the word you use, which was I think I learned a new word with you from one of your TikToks, but you were talking about, I think the way you worded it, the Bible is inerrant or isn't inherent. I don't want to misquote you, so just for clarification purposes, but I remember you said something along the sentiment of the Bible is inerrant or isn't inherent. And you were talking about how you can't trust necessarily everything that's in it without seeking the nuance and context to try to understand the time period that it was written in. And this is, like I said, this isn't even like can you explain yourself? But I think that for people to kind of really get what you're talking about when you're saying, oh, the Bible is beautiful. But I think we could both agree, if you really read the Bible for its totality and understand the context, the Bible is probably the most ghetto book ever written in my life. Like, there's baby mama drama. There's
a lot going on there. Yeah.
There's supremacy going on in there. There is where people went from being the good guy to the bad guy, just like as you just said, depending on what perspective you're looking on. But the way that you said that was the Bible. I think you said the Bible is inerrant or isn't inherent, but just to inerrant, I think you said it was. But if you wanted to kind of have that home when you're talking to people about, if you're going to read the Bible, you have to understand all the context that it comes with for you to really say you're going to live your life by this, if you're going to live your life by this.
Yeah. Well, inerrant, and like people say that the Bible
inerrant. Got it.
People say that the Bible is inerrant and infallible. So inerrant means that it is incapable of being wrong. The Bible cannot be wrong. Infallible means that there can be no errors. So the problem with that is what you think the Bible is. So I believe the Bible is inerrant indeed. There are no errors in the Bible because the Bible is just a collection of different narratives, of poems and stories and historical accounts and just a lot of fables even. So how could there be error in things that people were writing at certain times? There is no error in literature. There is no error in literature. It's just literature. It's just a way, it's just history. It's just humanity putting their experiences onto paper. So yeah, it's inerrant. However, if you think that what it means is that it's infallible, then that there can be no errors, and therefore this is the word of God and there is nothing wrong here, then we have a lot of problems, because there is a lot of wrong behavior in there. But when I say the Bible is probably, yeah, it's inerrant, it means I don't read it as the word of God. I read it as an ancient collection of books of wisdom. So, as an ancient collection of books of wisdom, it means that there is no error. It was perfect for the people of the time. They were sharing their wisdom with us. It does not mean that I get to extrapolate the Bible, bring it to today, and make it fit my current circumstances. That is
That
absurd.
part.
Yeah,
That
that is absurd.
part. Oh my goodness.
It's absurd and it's dangerous. It's very, very dangerous to take things that were written 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and extrapolate it and say, we're going to make it fit my situation today. Because unavoidably, you're going to be manipulating words to be able to give you what you want to hear. You never extrapolate to be able to hold yourself accountable. The extrapolation is always happening when people want to justify really problematic behavior. So we get to extrapolate and say, well, they took over land, so we get to take over land. No, you do not. No, you do not. Because what they did had a specific context. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was right. It could have been wrong. And it had a specific content. They are telling a story. They are not giving us a morality on that story. If you read a lot of the books, a lot of the stories that are in the Bible, there is no, this was right and this was wrong. It's just, this was it. This is what happened. And we get to discuss. That's why I love the way that Jewish people engage it, because Jewish people sit down and say, what does this mean for us then? What can we learn from these things that our ancestors did and the ways in which they behaved? What can we learn from them? What are our ancestors trying to tell us? And there is always an invitation to conversation. It's never they did it, so we get to. That's not the way that the Bible works, because, like, for instance, I'll give you the story of Judah and Tamar. You know the story, right? Tamar marries Judah, one of Judah's sons. He dies without giving her a son. So she is given another son, and same, he dies, and then he's given Onan, who decides to ejaculate outside of her because he doesn't want to die. And so it says that God didn't like that, and he dies, which is messy and complicated. We have to ask, what does that all mean? But then Tamar makes a decision, and she makes a decision to dress up as a prostitute and sleep with Judah and get pregnant from Judah to be able to be safe in that environment, in that society, in a very patriarchal society where women were treated as less than and they needed to have a man. The Bible doesn't say if what Tamar did or didn't do was right. The Bible doesn't say if what Judah did or didn't do is right or wrong. It doesn't. It doesn't. Because that is not of interest for the Bible. The Bible is not, I always was told that it was a blueprint for morality and for us to know how to live life. Bullshit. It's not. The Bible is just ancestors of all of us, collective ancestors, writing about their experiences, how things were handled and what happened, to let us know where we come from, to let us know what they learned, to let us know not even what they learned, but how they behaved, the things that they did, and the consequences of those things. So we get to say, why did Tamar do that? And now, knowing systems of oppression, now knowing trauma, now knowing all of the things that we know Tamar was behaving out of, like, she was trying to survive. What she did was not wrong. It's like what I tell my kids. I'm sorry that I didn't create a safe enough environment, that you had to lie to me. The only thing we can do is look at Tamar and say, I'm so sorry the system failed you.
That
I'm
part.
so sorry. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to read this book and realize there are no errors in it, because even the question of error makes no sense when you are just telling stories. I'm just telling you stories of how we lived. I'm just telling you stories of how we behaved. I'm just showing you the songs that we sang with you. I'm showing you the poetry that we wrote. And you get to do with all of that wealth of wisdom from just having information from your ancestors. You get to do with that as you wish. So yeah, it's inerrant. That does not mean we get to extrapolate it. It doesn't mean it's infallible. It's absolutely not infallible. It doesn't mean that it is the word of God. It simply means that it's a treasure. That's what it is. It's a treasure.
So one thing that I've always had to, I would say, like, reconcile with people when we're talking about, when I'm trying to talk to people about like my faith, for instance. I always tell people my faith is for me. That's it. So when I say that my faith is for me, that's it. It wasn't supposed to, I'll say it like this. The minute that the gospel aligned itself with the world's norms, I think that's when the gospel failed. Because even in the Roman Catholic era, when Jesus was trying to, well, I wouldn't even say that he was trying to. I think Jesus was just trying to liberate people at his speed and whatever he was doing. Though he knew like the oppression and the systems around him, he never aligned himself with Caesar. You know what I'm saying? Our agenda was never supposed to look like his. So then when I see Christians lose their poop, essentially, when we get a president that doesn't look like our agendas, when we get a representative that doesn't look like we'll call this our religious agendas, we lose our victory. And it's like, we were never supposed to be in, not so much be in those spaces, but Jesus was never supposed to be president. Jesus was supposed to be your friend. Jesus was supposed to be the standard. You know what I'm saying? But he never even, though he knew and complained and had his gripes with Caesar's practices. Sure, absolutely. You know, people were just being killed. They were under dictatorship. But even he himself did not try to get in that room and rule from that room. That was never supposed to be his throne room. Talk to me a little bit about, when we're talking about, especially if you just don't have a smartphone, but when we're talking about people that feel the need to attach, we'll say in this context purposes, religion to a legislative system, attach religion to a political party, how dangerous that really is, and how that actually plays more into colonization than it does liberation.
Yeah. Where politics are power, right? I mean, politics are not power. That's not the real definition, but politics have become power. And legislation is the way in which we tell people what is acceptable and not acceptable in our society. The problem with using religion to be able to determine legislation and to be able to determine the ways in which we are going to have the world is that this is always happening in regards to who is supposed to have power. How do we want society to look like? Which is rooted in supremacy, because it comes from the assumption that Christianity and the ways in which they interpret the Bible, in which they practice their own faith, is the right way. And that is rooted in supremacy culture, right? Believing that my way, the way you just said, that your faith is your own, it's for you. I believe that's the way it should be, right? Our spirituality is part of our own individual journey as humans. But the moment that I say my spirituality and the way that I experience the world and the way in which I have chosen to live is the way that everybody should choose to live, and it's the only way that you can ensure that you are well and that you are accepted and approved of, then we're talking about supremacy culture completely. So we have issues like compulsory monogamy, for instance. For compulsory monogamy is this idea that the only way that people can be in a healthy, good relationship is when two people get married, which marriage is just a contract between two people and the state, in which two people that are heterosexual people get married, and then they get married forever. Forever. That's the only right way. Well, we know that's not true. We know divorces happen. We know people die. We know that some people are polyamorous. We know that some people choose not to marry. We know that there is gay people. And so when we say my way, the way in which I've chosen to live my life and the way in which I'm wired, really, the way in which I process the world and take in information is the right way to be, then we marginalized a whole bunch of different people. So no, religion should not have anything to do with the ways in which we legislate, the ways in which we have conversations about politics, because the conversation has to be, how do we ensure that this is a safe and good and healthy society for all of us? And for it to be good and healthy for all of us, it requires for all of us to give input into it, which means Christians have to stop thinking that they get to determine what is best for everybody else, because they don't. They just
Or better
don't.
yet, they need to die to this I'm being persecuted mindset in
No.
America of all
Yes.
places.
That is
In
just
America of all
embarrassing.
places.
Yeah, that is just embarrassing. And I really, really think that that comes out of, one, trying to avoid accountability, and two, when you believe that the Bible is the word of God, and the Bible says that they will know that you are my disciples because they will treat you like they treated me, but nobody has been oppressed for being a Christian in the West for a very, very long time, then you have to make, like, you have to jump hoops, jump through hoops to be able to say, like, yeah, we are being oppressed and we are being persecuted because they said that we cannot legislate for everybody else. And so, they get to appease their own conscience and not grapple with the fact that they are, in fact, not being disciples of Jesus at all.
That part. There's something that you said there. It's the wanting to adopt this persecution complex to avoid accountability. Like, I don't know how many times I've dealt with people that I'll separate Christians from disciples of Christ, because for me, I kind of, for some odd reason, well, not some, it's not odd at all. For me, the term Christian seems like a dirty word, especially after
Yes.
January 6th. But when I always tell people, they're like, "Oh, they're only treating me this way because I'm a Christian." It's like, really? I thought it was because you were, homophobic. It's share
Right.
homophobic sentiments. Oh, they treat me like this because I'm a Christian. Really? I thought it was because you're horribly misogynistic and you treat women like crap. No, they treat me like this because I'm a Christian. Oh, I thought it was because you didn't care about the least of these, and your doctrine seems to be ableism. See, it's very
Right.
easy. It's very easy to blame Christ for some of our problems that we have subscribed to willingly, in a sense. And it's a deflection technique. I
Right.
always tell people, like, even and maybe this may be cold in a place of privilege just because it is my spirituality. But when people are like, I hate Christianity, it's like, well, what do you hate about Christianity? Do you hate the faith in itself, or do you hate the Christian that represented it? You know what I'm saying? What was it
Yeah.
about it that somebody did wrong? Not so much do I want to make amends for them, but I think it's more of like, it is an accountability for me, because it's like, oh, I could end up like that if I don't do things the right way, if I don't treat people well, if I forget about the least of these and stuff like that. I think that's where it becomes dangerous, because, like, as you just said, when we decide to, I would say, take religion and try to inseminate politics and say that we're trying to save the world, but really what we're trying to do is legislate morality that fit and affirm our biases, we have stepped away from the ways of Jesus, who was the suffering servant before he was king, in a sense. I think we forget that so many times.
Yeah. You know what? Um I think that he was king because he was the suffering servant. I think that the invitation was exactly that. Like, to be king, it was an invitation to topple hierarchies, to think in a different way, to say, perhaps to be great is to love and serve the most marginalized. Perhaps to be king is not to have the palace, but instead to, like, use all of your privilege for the purpose of protecting the most marginalized. Perhaps that is what it means to be king. And people don't want to hear that. People want to be king. People just want to be king. And so they don't want that they don't want that Jesus. And I tell people I don't follow Jesus, I follow the Christ. I also have a lot of hangups, right, with, like, things that make me uncomfortable. So because people have said that they follow Jesus and have caused so much harm following Jesus, I'm like, I don't follow your Jesus. I have no interest in your Jesus. I don't. It's white Jesus. I don't have no interest in white Jesus, but the Christ I have interest in, and I follow the Christ. And I make that differentiation just because of all the hangups that we have. But the reality is that when people say, I don't like Christianity, they are absolutely right. Neither do we. Right?
Mm.
We don't like that Christianity either.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell Christians all the time, they tell me, like, why are you so harsh on Christians? Why do you talk about Christianity so much?
We're
And I'm like,
supposed to.
because I love it. Because I love the Christ, because I love Christianity. A lot of Christian narratives and a lot of Christian theology has been such a huge part of my liberation, that because I love it so much, I have to talk about the abusive, toxic parts of it, because it breaks my heart that something that was meant as a tool of liberation is being used as a weapon of oppression. Now, the question has to be then, if you love it too, I don't understand why you're okay with the way it's being co-opted. And the only thing that you want to do is wash your hands and say they are not real Christians, when historically Christians have caused more harm than done good. So the only appropriate thing for Christians to do is to hold our own accountable and not stop being
Facts.
like, oh, they are not Christians, so I don't have to deal with it because I'm the real true Christian. No, shut up. They are Christians. We are Christians. Everybody's a Christian that says he's a Christian, which means as a Christian, I get to hold you accountable. It is my responsibility to hold you accountable. But they want to be busy holding Muslims accountable, holding Jewish people accountable, holding atheists accountable, and having long theological conversations with them to try to prove that they are better than them, instead of realizing that inside of their own religion, inside of their own faith, is where the most harm is being caused. So, no, I don't talk about Muslim faith, or I don't talk about Jewish theology unless it is to praise these theologies. I don't talk about atheists in disparaging ways. I talk about Christians, and I focus on Christians because I am one and I have an expertise in that. And therefore, I care so much that we stop causing harm that I will continue to hold us accountable. It's the right thing to do. It's what the man flipped tables and made whips, but I cannot make videos on TikTok, apparently.
Man, one of my favorite examples is when Peter was being racist. And Jesus was like, what are you? No, it wasn't Jesus, it was Paul. Paul came up to him and was like, man, you're being racist. You treating the Jews all types of ways when the Gentiles around, but forgot I'm Jewish. You know what I'm saying? Jesus and himself had to check all his disciples when they didn't want him to talk to the Samaritan. They're like, what are you doing? You can't talk to her. You're not supposed to talk to her. Forget the fact that she was a woman for a second, but she was a Samaritan too. And he was just like, what is wrong with y'all? Like, do y'all not know who I am? And you want to follow me?
Right.
I think that the way that you drew that dichotomy is beautiful, because a lot of times people get caught up with, how do I say this? They get caught up in how their pastors chase Christ. If it depends on what Christ it is. Is it the right Christ or the white Christ? They get caught up in this ideology that they think is Jesus, opposed to the walk that is Jesus. And I think when we're talking about, specifically when we're talking about with churches, that's why for me, like, this is all I know. You know what I mean? When I talk about Christianity, that's all I know. I don't have anything to say about Muslim practice because I don't know anything about it. I just don't.
Right.
I didn't grow up in that. I don't have a familiarity. I don't have this term I adopted from one of my sisters is relational equity with people that even live that life, and so on and so forth. So first thing I'm probably gonna come out of my mouth is, I'm like, man, these doggone Christians, man, the damn church. And they're like, why you always got such bad things to say? It's like, because there are good things, and I know the good things that could be there, but it would be, I don't know how to describe it. It would be terrible to celebrate the good things without acknowledging the bad things.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It would be terrible to acknowledge the good things, even like as an individual has done, if that individual has not done the work to rectify the wrongs that they have done. So when we're talking about the beauty of Christianity, I for me purposely, especially in my line of work, as far as being an activist, I have to acknowledge where we've messed up at. So that's why when we see these charter schools that we have to dig up these grave sites of indigenous children, and the people like, that's not our history. I'm like, no, it is our history. And we need to acknowledge that. If we don't acknowledge that, then we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, what we're called to do.
I'd argue it's unethical. it's unethical to talk only about the good you can see and choose intentionally to say, well, the bad parts were just not, they were not real Christians. It's unethical. It's unethical, and it's a type of gaslighting to victims of Christianity all over the world.
Mm.
I'm told that all the time. I'm told all the time, like, oh, well, you just found a pastor that was not a good Christian. Nope, that's not true, because what he was teaching me was being taught in hundreds of thousands of churches all throughout history. He was teaching me Christian theology that has been just co-opted to become grooming theology. And it's unethical, and it's a type of gaslighting that puts the problem on me. You just didn't realize that you were under a bad teacher. No, no, no. Christianity has caused harm, and we need to be fine saying that. If two things can be true at the same time. Christianity has caused a lot of harm, and Christianity has been good for some. So when I say things like that too, I get a lot of people that are people of color that tell me, like, well, what about the things that people of color have done? Totally. Did we take this religion that was shoved down our throat, because this wasn't ours, at least for native people of what we call America today, and for a lot of Black people that were moved to America, or what we call America today, this religion was shoved down our throats. Did we take it and make something good out of it? Did we find the liberation in it? Absolutely. Was it still shoved down our throat and a weapon of colonization that has caused and continues to cause and wreak havoc all throughout our entire society? Yes, both. Absolutely both. Liberation theology exists, and also theology has been used to colonize us all. So we can hold that nuance, we can hold that complexity, and not doing it, it's unethical and it's harmful. Um, it's harmful. I don't like when people do that to me, when they say, like, those were not real Christians, because then I feel like, oh, you're telling me that I wasn't a real Christian either, even though I took it very, very, very seriously. And I believed all of those theologies that were harmful because I was indoctrinated into them. So I wasn't real. I didn't believe really. So it gets complex and messy, and it is a type of psychological abuse too, to tell people like they are not real Christians. No, you're just trying to avoid accountability. That's it. You just don't want to grapple with the ways in which your faith is complicit in oppression. That's all. You just don't like that idea. You just want to be the
Hmm.
good guys, because we are so steeped in dualism. If we are not the good guys, then we can only be the bad guys, instead of recognizing that we are complex, nuanced beings that can cause good and harm too, both.
So one thing that I am curious, because I'm not sure if I may have missed this in any of your content. So you grew up essentially, like, for the majority of your life, you grew up being a Christian, believing in this theology and everything, correct?
Uh-huh. Yes. Colombia is a very Christian Catholic country. So even if you're not raised completely Catholic, all of the ideologies, that's what's called Christian hegemony. All of the ideologies and theologies are a part of society anyways. But yeah, my family was Catholic, not super practicing Catholics, but Catholic. And then my dad became a Christian and I became a Christian too.
Okay. So one thing that I am curious, and if you feel comfortable talking about this with me
Mhm.
in this space, that's completely up to you. What was it for you that, I guess, made you want to step away from Christianity? Was it like an event? Was it just like a slow burn that I can't say made you, because you made the decision at the end of the day to walk away. What was the circumstances that made you want to, I guess, step away from, I guess, this faith? What was it? What were the circumstances that pushed
Yeah,
you in that direction?
there were a lot of things. It was a long yeah, it was a long journey of a lot of events happening. But the closer you get to power inside of the church, the more messed up you realize it is. The more that you have privilege and opportunities in the church. So the more opportunities I was having inside of the church, the more that I was getting to do, the more that I was getting to look behind the curtain, the more that I was like, this is very ugly, and this is exploitation. This is exploitative. And so I was getting more and more uncomfortable with that, and I realized that not only were people being exploited, I was being exploited the whole time. So I worked inside of evangelical churches for 10 years as my full-time job, And at the moment that I was getting paid the most, I was getting paid $700 a month and being told that I should be grateful because most people don't get paid to do ministry. But I was so
What?
lucky
Hold
that
on,
I
hold
was
on,
getting
hold on, hold on, hold
$700 a
on.
month.
What time? Like, give me like years. Like, how $700 a month? What year was this when this was all taking place?
I left the church in 2005.
Okay, so $700 a month. My old apartment was $800 a month, and that was back in 2018. But okay, continue.
Right.
Continue.
Mind you, I have a master's in this. I have a master's in theology and ministry. I educated myself. I studied all the time. I did a lot of work. I was working 60 hours a week and I was getting paid $700 a month and being told to be grateful because most people don't have the opportunity to even be paid to do ministry. Most people have to just be bivocational. And so I accepted those conditions and I had children. And but a lot of things, like a lot, like seeing that I didn't have insurance. So for the whole time that I worked inside of the church, I had no medical insurance. I couldn't go to the doctor. I didn't visit a dentist for 10 years or a doctor for 10 years because I couldn't afford it. um but they are talking about how we care for people, but you're not even caring for your damn staff. I don't understand what you're talking about. And it was that cognitive dissonance that I was like, you talk about care and I'm not cared for here. Nobody cares. Nope, nobody. So I was having children, and my second daughter was born, and she had some medical issues. Um, and it was like, we're so sorry that she's going through that. When are you ready to come back to work? And I was like,
Oh
okay.
hell, oh hell
I was
no.
like, okay. So I'm not.
Mm-mm-mm.
I'm a resource. You're just using me. You don't care. You don't really. Like you pretend to care, but you don't really care. And so I was dealing with I was depressed at the time, really depressed, and I didn't know it was depression. I was dealing with suicidal ideation. I didn't know it was suicidal ideation. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have anybody. I couldn't talk to anybody. I wanted to talk to a psychologist, but I didn't have the money to be able to talk to a psychologist, to go to therapy. I didn't have the money or the time. I had two kids that were an 18-month-old and a newborn, and I was working 60 hours a week. My husband was working 80 hours a week. He was getting paid just as little as me, a little bit more than me. I'm lying. He was getting paid a little bit more than me, but still we couldn't afford anything. We couldn't afford food to go out. We couldn't. And then we were being told that people that use the system to be able to survive, so people that get any kind of aid from the system, are using the system, and that is wrong. And we're like, we can't survive without asking for some help. And so I'm struggling with all of that, and just I wanted to die. Honestly, I did. I felt like I've given everything, all of my life, to this God, and I work really hard for the church. I work really hard for this kingdom, for ministry, and I'm miserable. I hate my life. I absolutely hate my life. I hate how they make me pretend that everything is fine, but nothing is really fine. I hate all of the things that we talk about that we are doing, but we are really not doing at all. This is all a game. This is all pretending. I hate that all of these people say that their marriages are so wonderful and that they love their wives, but in behind closed doors, I've seen them. They hate each other. I didn't like my marriage. I didn't want to be married anymore. So I spent more time thinking about what it would look like if the world ended than what it would look like to live a good life. I was absolutely depressed, and I needed something to change. And I knew that a lot of the problem was the fact that I was inside of this space that was toxic and abusive and was exploitative. And so I decided to walk away. Because Point Loma Nazarene University is where I went to get my master's. And at Point Loma, people that are working in ministry, they would offer them 1 hour of therapy sometimes. So they did. They offered that. And my husband and I went together. And the therapist, we told him the story. We told him where we worked, what we did. And he said, you too do know that you are depressed, right? And that you are on the verge of a really, like, of something breaking. And you're not well. Something needs to change. Either they need to pay you more, or your expectations have to be different, or you need to quit. Like, something needs to change because this is not good. This is not healthy for you. So I quit. And we still kept going to church, to other churches. And they said that we couldn't work or serve because we were too broken, even though we were not the problem. So we just did Uber. So my husband would do Uber at night, and I would do Uber during the day, and just for a few hours because I was nursing and taking care of babies. And he would do it for longer hours, as long as he could, so we could pay our bills. And we were making more money than we did inside of the church. And going to all of these churches, I realized, all of them are the same. All of these churches are the same. The problem is the system. It's not our individual church. The problem is the system. And then I also realized that I accepted and tolerated a lot of boundary violations because I had been groomed to accept boundary violations, first from my family of origin, and then later, my pastor. And so I started being like, what would it look like to have boundaries? What would it look like to heal? And I started reading a lot about healing because we couldn't afford therapy again. And then I found some therapists and it wasn't good experiences. So I started healing by reading a lot about healing and wholeness, by reading a lot about neuroscience. That's why I'm so passionate about the nervous system, because it healed me, like learning about my own nervous system. So the more that I read and the more that I learned about systems of oppression and about healing and wholeness and about the nervous system, the more that I realized that a lot of the things that I had been told were final and real and absolute truth were not. Like, I couldn't believe in the fact that we're all sinners anymore, because I know enough neuroscience that it just doesn't add up. So that's what happened. A lot of things just added up. And becoming a mom, I wanted my kids to have a healthy mom, and I wasn't healthy. And I don't think that I would have done it. I wouldn't have kids today. If I knew all the things that I know, I wouldn't have kids today. But I do have them now. And I do believe that without my kids, I wouldn't have done the work of being healthy, because I didn't love myself enough to heal myself. But I love them enough to give them a healthy mom. And so now it's different. Now I love myself enough that I do it for myself, and they get to benefit from that too. But in the beginning, I was like, nope, they need a healthy mom, and this is not healthy. I am not healthy. This is not healthy. So I walked away for them too.
Gotcha. So it's terrible hearing like these, for instance, these horror stories where we're talking about like while navigating in these like spaces and everything like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about, I would say, like boundaries not being respected. And I think I've heard you like allude to this in a couple of like your videos, talk about like your old pastor. I don't know the story, mind you, of like what happened with your old pastor. And I know a lot of like when we're just talking about exploitation, we're talking about people just wanting you to be okay with their, we'll just call them poopy practices. I have kids that watch this. That it's okay. You talk however you want to talk on here. I get my baby hairs pulled by some people's mamas. That's fine. But if you're okay with, comfortable with it, what exactly like did you have to go through with your old pastor, especially when you're talking about like boundaries not being respected in like this old, if you're comfortable talking about it. You don't want to talk about it, that's absolutely okay.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there were so many things, and a lot of it is psychological abuse that is not super easy to pinpoint. But things like there is no saying no to the pastor, right? You always said yes to the pastor. Whatever they said, it was like yes, and you made it happen and you made it work. I remember the first time I said no to him, and he looked at me like, "What did you say? Hi, baby." And he said, "What did you say?" And I was like, "No, I can't do that. I can't do that." It was a project and he wanted it done in 24 hours. And I was like, "I can't do that. I can't do that." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "I can't do that. I have kids and I am exhausted and it's just not, I can't do it." And I was panicking inside because I was groomed to believe that you don't say no to your pastor. Like I was groomed to believe that you don't say no to your mama. And so he was like, "Oh, okay." Things like that, and like all of these little things, like he was never wrong. It was every time he made a mistake or every time he caused harm, and I would bring it up to him and be like, "Hey, this caused harm." He was like, "Oh, you just need to give me the benefit of the doubt. You just need to believe that I'm doing the best for everybody here." And I was like, "It wasn't the best for me." And he was like, "Not now, because you don't understand, because you are like spiritually immature. But in the long run,
oh my
it will
God,
be the best for you."
I hate. I know I'm not supposed to hate anything, but that sentiment, that mindset, the you choose to be offended, you're being spiritually
Right.
immature. I hate that. I hate it so much. Oh my
And we're
goodness.
talking about racial aggression here too. We're talking about misogyny. Like I remember the first time I held him accountable for anything was because we made a video and I was in the video, and he after that he was like, I don't want you to be in videos anymore. Because you look fine, but you have an accent and it's really hard to understand you. And
Excuse me.
mind you, Australian pastors came and visited all the time. English pastors from like England came and visited all the time. But my accent, it was my accent that people couldn't understand. And so I told him, I was like, hey, the hell? Like, what is that? I don't understand why my accent is a problem, but nobody else's accent like is a problem. And the first thing he said, he was like, I don't remember saying that. And I was like, you did. There were more people in the room. And he was like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I have a brief memory of that. But I mean, you just need to know that I'm doing the best for the people that we have. I know the people that God has given us. So I'm trying to do the best for the people that God has given us. Like, God gave me the vision, not you. So I know it had nothing to do with your particular accent. It had to do with, I picked up on the fact that people were not understanding you. So these, like, you don't get to hold me accountable ever. And when you do, there is always an excuse, and it's always my problem. It was always me. I was not doing something wrong. I was not working enough. I at some point he said, I think that you have hidden sin. And I was like, or you're causing harm. And he was like, nah, it's hidden sin. Like, that's why you keep holding me accountable, is because you have hidden sin. So things like that. And this, yeah, like, never get to say no. The expectations, like, you have to be here at 5 in the morning. We had to be there at 5:30 in the morning on Sundays, and we would leave at 4:30 p.m. or something like that. And it was like, well, this is ministry. This is what God wants you to do. Like, aren't you so lucky that you get to do these for God? All of that is just boundary violations. Abuse is psychological abuse, is emotional abuse. It's wrong. It's oppression. It's exploitation.
And the curious question that I had about that in specifically, because obviously I'm not a woman of color. I'm just not. So obviously I don't live the experience, but talk about when how important it is to not only set that boundary, but to have that safe space, especially being like a woman of color in these spaces when we're talking about like when you're looking for some sense of like spiritual insight, you're looking for some sense of relief. Um, how dangerous that is, because if you can't even be safe in these spaces, what does that speak for everything else? Obviously, I'm still learning. I benefit obviously from the patriarchy. Though I'm still a man of still a man
Right.
of color, I'm still a man at the end of the day. But talk about how dangerous, and you speak a lot of like the psychological toll it had on you. Talk about how dangerous it is to have the one place that's supposed to be a sanctuary, but
Right.
even that's not safe. How damaging that is being a woman of color, being in these spaces.
Right. Well, that's I think why I was so depressed, and I just wanted, when I left, I wanted to die for a long time, because I thought, okay, if this is not safe, if everything that I've been told about how this is what you're supposed to do, this is the safest place, this is where you're the most welcomed, this is where you'll be the most loved, is the place where I'm being the most abused and the most traumatized, then what is the purpose of any of this? Do I even bother with the rest of the world? Do I even bother going out there and making relationships with people and trusting people? If these are the people of God, the people that are supposed to be the most safe, the people that are supposed to love me the best, and I'm being so abused and harmed by them, I'm being gaslit and lied about, and lied to, then I don't know that I want to live anymore. Like, I didn't want to live. I didn't. because I really, really genuinely believed that this was the safest place in the world, that I was fully welcome there, that I was loved there, that I was cared for there. But they discarded me. Like the moment I started asking questions, the moment I chose to leave, they discarded me. And I'm not talking just about the pastor, I'm talking everyone. I mean, except for a handful of people, I was discarded. And I was now dangerous, and nobody should engage with me. And I was punished for wanting the best for me. I was punished for wanting to be whole and healed. I was punished for for standing up for myself. And so I kept thinking, well, if I'm being punished here for caring for myself, then should I just not care for myself? Is the expectation God has for me? Because at that time I still believed in God as a being. I was like, does he hate me? Does he just want me to be used and abused? Is that what he created for me? Am I a type of Job? And I read Job over and over and over and over again. And I was like, am I a type of Job that he just wants to break me and use me as an example? Um, and it was painful. And I was like, I don't want to. I don't want that. I don't want that. That doesn't seem like a good God for me. And it doesn't seem fair for my children. I kept thinking about my children. I was like, it doesn't seem fair for my children that I've been chosen to be tortured in every possible space that I'm in. It doesn't seem fair for my children that I have been chosen to be mistreated and not believed and be left alone. That doesn't feel fair. And so that's when I started giving myself permission and be like, what if this God doesn't even exist? What if this whole entire thing is not true? What if, because see, at the same time, I had all these friends from Colombia who were not Christians, who I grew up with. Because I went to private school in Colombia. And so the people that I went to kindergarten with, I graduated with. So we grew up together. And all of these people who were not Christians, and I was telling them the stories of what I was going through, they were like, how can we support you? They never stopped loving me. When I was a Christian or when I left the church, they were like, how can we support you? How can we love you better? They were sending me care packages. And I was like, but I was told that Christians loved me. I was told that non-Christians couldn't be trusted. And then I ended up in Turkey, the country, with my husband. We stayed there for
not an actual turkey, but the country. You didn't you weren't swallowed up to the belly of a turkey.
No, I went to Turkey, the country. Yeah. And I was cared for and loved and treated with so much kindness and respect by so many Muslim people. And I sat with them in their houses, and they fed me and they fed my children. One night, it was really late. We got back to the Airbnb really, really late. And the Airbnb person, I sent him a text message and I was like, hey, Seki, that's his name. I still have him, Seki. It's super late. We got back super late because of transportation or whatever. And is there anywhere that you know that is still open this late? Because we were in the like right behind the Hagia Sophia, which is a little bit more conservative on an area, and they close everything earlier. And he said, yeah, I'll go. So I'm talking, it's like midnight, and he comes over to the Airbnb. We have 3 kids at the time. They are little. My husband picks one kid up. I pick the other one up. Seki picked the other kid up. And we went to this restaurant. He knocked on the restaurant that was already closed. These people came down, opened the door, and fed us. They just gave us food. And they weren't expecting. It was not because we were foreigners and they wanted us to pay. It was because we had spent time with them and they cared. And they were like, no, the kids can't go to bed without food. We'll give them food. Like, don't worry about it. At the same time, Christians were lying about me and they were mistreating me and they were saying that I was dangerous, which is they still say. They were saying people shouldn't listen to me. I've gotten death threats because of the things that I say online. My address was shared online saying like, you need to stop talking about what you're talking about. And then my address was shared publicly. The names of my children, like people have been like, you should care better for the names of my children. This is all Christians doing it. And then at the same time, Muslims and non-Christians and atheists and people from other faiths are being the kindest to me. And so I had a huge crisis of then what? Like everything I've been told is a lie. And I've been xenophobic and I've been myself Islamophobic because of the things that I've been indoctrinated into. And I don't want to be any of that anymore. I want to love people well. I just wanted to love people well. So all of those things kind of played a part in that. And then, that crisis of being like the safest place in the world is actually the place where I was the most abused too. It's heartbreaking, and that's why I fight Christians, because I know what it is like to be inside of the church, think that this is the place where you're going to be loved and taken care of, and then be mistreated in ways that are horrific.
So I wanted to bring a quote up. I don't know. You know who Dr. Christina Edmondson is by chance?
I don't, but I am acquainted with cult like ideologies and the bite system. Like, I don't know if you heard of the bite system of what makes a cult. And yes, all of these places are cults.
Yeah. One of the things that she put up a quote last year on Twitter. It was any organization, country, or ideology that requires you to love and obey it without any room for legitimate critique is a cult. And it sounds like, even just from like what you were talking about, like with your old pastor, I don't want to say it wasn't a church, because that's what they called themselves by, but
Right.
you were a part of a cult essentially.
Yeah.
And
I,
then
I
even
believe that the white evangelical churches individually, but collectively, are a cult. They are. They are built around a personality. There is behavior control. There is information control. People cannot question anything. There is an expectation of behavior. Everybody has to behave the same way. There is an expectation of homogeneity. That's a hard word to say for me. Homogeneity. Everybody's expected to behave the same way. All of those are characteristics of cults.
Well, I'm gonna say two things to that. First off, I don't when I say I don't care how you enunciate words, that's how you speak, that's perfectly fine. So please
Yeah.
don't like feel like you need to explain yourself. I mean, like, even when the scripture was being written, it wasn't in English. Shocking to other people's popular beliefs. So however you enunciate words, that's fine. You heard me botch English so many times today, so I'll find a way to forgive you, though I don't need to forgive you. And I think it speaks a lot to one, like, and I'm just saying this out loud, I don't know if anybody's ever said this part to you, but like, even to like, you have to, in a sense, like, kind of explain it, like how you talk. It's like, this is where I come from, this is how I articulate
Yeah.
myself, and
I'm fine
you
with it.
have
I
to
just
be,
like
yeah, you have to be okay with it. When I say you have to be okay, people that are listening to it, because somebody said something stupid on Twitter, and that's fine, they could go anyway. But I think it's that, but then it goes back to that piece where we were talking about earlier. It's like, people need to hear stories like this, because they need to know where the problems lie. Because if they
right.
really care about people and their souls and getting them to heaven, they would care about the fact that people that identify with the same God as them are putting them through hell too,
Right.
if they actually care. So I'm not going to be here to tell you what you feel is wrong. That's not my job. I'm not here to tell you what you feel is invalid, because I'm not in that business. Love is my ministry. That's it for me. But I guess like the only thing that I want to follow it up with is, when I say this, is, and I it's funny because how I said, like, I don't want to hear your apology, I want to hear your responsibility, but
Yeah.
I'm organically sorry that you had to go through that. It is heartbreaking. There's a couple times I had to, like, I was texting my community group, I was like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. But it is undeniably sad that you had to go through that. And unfortunately, when it comes to stuff like this, these are the hard stories that people need to hear. They need to hear this, not because of like clickbait, not because it's going to drive views, but if you're going to talk about the wonders and the beautifulness of Christianity, you need to talk about where we got it wrong. And
Right.
in your case, in your circumstance, and how this directly impacted you, um,
Yeah.
we got it wrong, unfortunately.
And I wish my story was unique. I wish
But
it
it's
was
not,
for me.
unfortunately.
Yeah. But I mean, I started this online page. It's called Do Better Church, because people were sharing their stories with me in my DMs. And I was like, I can't hold these stories on my own. It's a lot. It's too much. It's too painful. And I also believe that they needed to have a space where they were honored, you know. So I created this Do Better Church, where people submit their stories and we share them publicly so people can read them, and more importantly, they can be believed and they can be supported, because we aren't believed when we tell our stories. um I mean, we got thousands of stories, thousands that echo all of the things that happened to me, and then worse. We're talking about, like, because we didn't even talk about the homophobia that is inside of the church. We didn't talk about a lot of xenophobia, of course. We didn't talk about the ableism. We didn't talk about the fat phobia. We didn't talk about the many ways in which people are sexually exploited and sexually abused inside of the church, because sexual abuse is not just like literally rape, but there are other ways in which people are sexually abused inside of churches all the time. The ways in which purity culture is psychological abuse for many people. The ways in which women are told that our bodies are less than, that our bodies are dangerous. All of that is psychological torment and psychological abuse. Walking around the world thinking my body is going to cause somebody else to sin, and that is going to cause for God to be angry with them. That's carrying a responsibility that you're not supposed to carry. And that is starting to have self-hatred for your own body. And so my story and the abuse of the church is not unique to me. It's actually quite common. And anybody that identifies as a Christian should be angered by that. Anger is a right emotion to feel when you hear all of these stories of abuse inside of the church. Anger is appropriate. We should be angry, and that anger should lead us to demand better for everyone inside of these spaces.
Yeah, and I actually, and hopefully I got it right. I just plugged it into the comment section so other people, and I'll even plug it into the description of this video, because I've been turning my comments off since I've been developing my boldness and my blackness over the last couple of months. So I turn my comments off, and people want to argue with me, they can pay me to argue with me. Sign up for the Patreon. But that's the type of thing that I think people need to know, is like, they need to know that they have a place that they can talk to,
Right.
talk to people in these spaces. And there are people that are willing to listen. I could care less if this was 5 people, 500, 5,000, or if it was just you and me talking. Like, I feel like I needed to hear that, because even though I didn't grow up in the faith, I don't have that Bible camp Christian where I grew up in youth group. Like I said, I was going to hell on a scholarship before I changed my ways. But I think I need to hear that, because when I'm connecting with people and I'm hearing brokenness in all forms, and unfortunately some of people's brokenness started within the church. That's it. Oh, you actually said that works too. Thank you. I appreciate this. See, this is why I said we're sharing this space. We're doing the tag team. I'm gonna plug that in the comment section too. I appreciate you, Sister Joe. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You came
I thought I could, but I
through with the
can't.
clutch.
Yeah. Oh, because you have to be on Facebook. Or yeah, I don't know how comments work. I'm terrible.
No. You're fine. I'll plug it in everywhere. I got interns for that. This is nothing. You just made their job a little easier and made mine somewhat easier. So all good.
Perfect.
So one thing that I would like to do, as far as, because I feel like a lot of people, especially like within like my echo chambers, don't really know, is not only your story, but also like ways that they could not so much help you, because I'm not trying to make it seem like you're like this damsel in distress by any means, but where could people like find you on social media to learn more about you, and even learning more about like things to look for as far as like red flags and everything like that, when we're talking about navigating in these, like, I'll call them religious institutions for context purposes. Where can they find you to essentially learn more from you?
It's mostly on all social medias. I have an entire, like, Instagram is easier to organize information, so I use that a lot. But I have an entire, like, I don't know what those are called on Instagram, but there are a series of posts that talk about abusive theology and what is predatory, different predatory theology. So I think I go on detail about 10 different theologies that a lot of us have been indoctrinated into, most of us have been indoctrinated into, and why they are abusive, where they come from, and how they harm us, like how they cause psychological abuse or different types of abuse. And so I have that, and then a lot of highlights with like I have
Well,
highlights that explain
you got a
theology.
Patreon. I just found your Patreon.
I
I'm
do.
plugging that in.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. But yeah, a lot of social media, different like social media platforms where I share a lot of the things that I've learned because, as I said, like I learned how to do exegesis and how to study the Bible and how to understand the context and read this in Hebrew and Greek. And so I share all of those tools with people so that they cannot be abused inside of churches. We don't have to tolerate that anymore.
Absolutely. I think and it goes back to, like I said it before earlier, it's the fact that these are the spaces where you should feel the most safe
Yes.
and feel like it is a sanctuary. And the minute that you feel like it is becoming an asylum, you need to challenge that.
Yeah,
Um for sure, for
absolutely.
sure. Well, Sister Joe, it doesn't even feel like 2 hours and 23 minutes. It really doesn't. First off, I could definitely say I enjoy talking to you.
Thank
Um, yes, you are delightful to talk to. Absolutely. And I'm not gonna lie to you. Okay, so no cap, I was super nervous about this discussion for some odd reason. I was called by community. I was like, hey, I'm super nervous and scared, and my anxiety is going through the roof. They're like, calm down, just talk to her. She's a human being. I was like, I know, but like I said, Michael Jordan in this space personally. I
you.
just felt like
Thank
saying
you.
that out loud again.
That's
No
kind.
problem. But I will definitely say that talking to you, one opened my eyes to a lot of things. Getting not only to listening to your experience, but I feel like for me, just encouraging me to continue doing what I'm doing and just trying to dismantle these oppressive systems in all of these spaces. What do you say? You're always nervous. Well, I mean, yeah. Like the minute I feel like I'm not nervous is when I should be nervous. Leave me alone, Tyler. I'm gonna put you in timeout. Be quiet. But yeah, it just kind of provokes me to just continue doing the work that I need to do and also keep learning from people that don't have the same experience as me. Cause I mean, like, I'm American grown, even though English is my first language. That's fine.
Yeah.
I did not, go to school and don't have I didn't go to school with the like I said, you got more thermometers than you got more degrees than a thermometer, you know what I'm saying? But even though I didn't go through what you went through, that doesn't mean that I can't learn from you. And I think people need to step away from those biases and just put themselves in a situation where you're probably going to be uncomfortable, and that's a good thing because growth can happen in these uncomfortable spaces. So
Totally.
I appreciate you sharing this with me, for
Yeah.
sure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Before you leave though, I gotta ask, what do you have cooked up next? And when I say cooked up next, what else can we expect from you,
Yeah.
content wise? What are you like? What are you bringing to the table? What are you trying to? What other things do you have cooking up that we should pay attention to? And how can we, I guess, like help people to like pay attention to these things that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So right now I'm working on producing a podcast that is conversations about how do we move toward heaven on earth, because I still believe in heaven on earth, and how do we move toward heaven on earth. So I'm talking to particularly marginalized identities. I want to focus on marginalized identities because I believe that if you've never had the smell of sulfur in your nose and the pain of being in hell on this earth, then you don't know how to move us towards heaven. You don't know what it looks like to crawl out of hell. So I like to talk to marginalized identities because those are the people that I learned from the most, because all of us that are in marginalized identities have had to crawl our way out of hell. Therefore, we bear the scars of what it looks like to live in hell. And so we can talk about what it looks like also to move toward heaven. So the podcast is just conversations with people that are in marginalized identities about what does it look like to go toward heaven. And so I'm talking to a lot of therapists and a lot of experts on implicit biases and things like that. And I'm very excited about that. That'll take a couple of months, and we're already doing the recordings, and we want to do it with really high quality. And so it's taking a minute. And then I'm also working on a book right now that is called, or we'll see if they approve that. My editor approves these, but the name that I want is Predatory God. And it is a book about the ways in which we have been conditioned to believe that we have to tolerate and accept abuse, and how we can stop that and start living a full life where we are completely ourselves and we are embodying the divine within us. So those are the two things that I'm working on the most, which keep me busy all the time.
Gotcha. I'll step one. I'm already following you on essentially everything, so I know I'll stay up on it. And if anything I could help push, let me know. I have no
Thank
problem
you.
with it. Of course, I got you. But yeah, thank you. I don't know how many times I'm gonna say thank you, but thank you for not getting annoyed by me hounding you and sending like my people to hound you on
No.
social media to talk to me. I really appreciate you accepting my invitation on here.
Yes, of
And
course.
you are welcome back here anytime. If you want to talk about something, if you want to promote something that you have in the works, you are welcome back here anytime. This is a revolving door. Even though it is the Kid Casper podcast, I have no problem sharing this space with people that I've invited in this space and I've learned from in this space and just learned from in general. So you're welcome back here anytime. If you want to get in some good trouble and make people mad, I got no problem bringing you back up here. I have enjoyed this. Thank you everybody that tuned in tonight. This was good. This was fruitful. Hopefully this was liberating for somebody out there. Thank you for being peaceful for the most part. There's one idiot on. I'm not gonna call you idiot. I'm just gonna say not TikTok. It was Twitter. I'm not gonna say you're an idiot. You just missed the mark, and we're just gonna say that as nice as we can because it's not nice to talk about people in private or in public on how I feel about them. But that's besides the point. Thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. Thank you for being peaceful and respectful in the comment section. Always remember you are beautiful, blessed, and beloved. Raisins don't go in potato salad. Wait a minute. Sister Joe, you know people that put mayonnaise on peas?
Yes.
Do you put mayonnaise on peas?
No.
Okay. Why don't you put mayonnaise on?
Because
You're
it's
very
wrong.
quickly. It's
It's just like I don't even wanna. I don't have to elaborate. It's just wrong. So there's that.
We'll talk about this offline. Hang back for a little bit. I'll talk about this with you. But raisins don't go on potato salad. And Jesus wasn't white. Have a good night.